There's a silence in my apartment now that wasn't there before. It's not loud. It doesn't echo. It just sits there. Especially in the evenings, when the light starts to fade and there's nothing to distract me from it. We used to have this small routine. Nothing special. Just sitting across from each other after dinner, phones on the table, talking about nothing important. Work stories. Dumb observations. Plans we never followed through on. It felt ordinary. Safe. Now I sit in the same chair, and I can't remember what we used to talk about. I just remember the feeling of believing everything was fine. That's the part that's hard to accept. I didn't lose her in a dramatic explosion. There wasn't a screaming match or a door slamming. What I lost was quieter than that. I lost the version of myself who trusted without thinking. I didn't know that trust could disappear without a single confirmed fact. I didn't know you could feel something break before you had proof of anything. Looking back, it wasn't one big moment. It was a series of small things that didn't quite fit. A name on her screen I didn't recognize. A shift in tone when I walked into the room. Her phone turning face down more often than it used to. Individually, none of it meant anything. At least that's what I told myself. I didn't want to be the guy who overreacted. I didn't want to be insecure. The first time I felt it, that flicker of doubt, I almost laughed at myself. She had stepped into the hallway to take a call. That wasn't unusual. But something about the way her voice lowered made me pause. It wasn't what she said. I couldn't even hear the words. It was the softness. The carefulness. When she came back, she smiled like always. Sat down. Asked me about my day. And I remember thinking, you're being ridiculous. This is nothing. I nodded along. I told her about a meeting that ran too long. She listened. She reached for my hand. Everything looked normal. That's what made it worse later. Because the line between safety and suspicion isn't a loud one. It's thin. Invisible. You cross it quietly, almost by accident. The first time I asked about something, casually, not accusing, she looked at me like I'd said something strange. Why would you even think that? She asked. Not angry. Not defensive. Just confused. Almost hurt. I apologized immediately. That became a pattern I didn't recognize at the time. Every doubt felt like a flaw in me. Every question felt like a betrayal of her. And somewhere along the way, I stopped trusting my own reactions. I started editing my thoughts before they left my mouth. It's strange how you can live beside someone and slowly begin to feel like an outsider in your own relationship. I didn't realize then that the moment I started questioning myself instead of the situation, that was the moment something essential had already slipped away. When I think back to the beginning, that's what makes it all feel so unreal. Because at first, it wasn't complicated. It wasn't messy. It was easy in a way I didn't expect. I met her through a mutual circle, the kind of situation where you don't think much of it at the time. Someone brings someone along, you exchange a few polite words, and then life moves on. But she didn't fade into the background the way most people do. She had this calm presence. Not loud or attention-seeking. More like, steady. Like she knew who she was, and she didn't need to prove anything. The first real conversation we had wasn't deep. It was actually kind of boring, if I'm honest. We talked about work frustrations, the kind of food we hated, little everyday stuff. But I remember walking away thinking, that felt comfortable. And comfort can be addictive. We started seeing each other more after that. Coffee, casual dinners, walks that turned into long talks without either of us really noticing the time. She was good at listening. Not in an exaggerated way, not like a performance. Just, attentive. Like what I said mattered. I'd been in relationships before where everything felt like a negotiation. Where you were always trying to be understood. With her, it felt simple. She'd ask questions that made me feel seen. What was that like for you? Did you ever think you'd end up here? Small things, but they landed. I started looking forward to her messages in a way that surprised me. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were consistent. She was consistent. That's the word I would have used back then. Reliable. Thoughtful. Mature. She talked a lot about honesty early on. Not in a suspicious way. More like she valued emotional health. She'd mention how exhausting it was when people played games. I don't have the energy for that, she said once, shaking her head. Life's too short to be unclear with people. I remember liking that. Admiring it. It made me feel like I was with someone who didn't believe in hiding things. She also had strong boundaries, which I respected. She didn't overshare. She didn't rush intimacy emotionally. She wasn't the type to collapse into you right away. At the time, I saw that as a good sign. I told myself, this is what a healthy adult relationship looks like. When we became official, it didn't feel like a dramatic shift. It just felt like the natural next step. We built small routines. Grocery trips. Lazy mornings. Quiet evenings. The kind of relationship that doesn't look exciting from the outside but feels solid from the inside. She'd tease me for being too trusting. You always assume the best in people, she'd say, smiling like it was something sweet. I took it as a compliment. And maybe that's where something started forming, even then. Because she was socially smooth in a way I wasn't. She knew how to handle people. How to speak carefully. How to stay composed. I was more straightforward. If something bothered me, it showed on my face. If I didn't understand something, I asked. She had this way of making everything sound reasonable. Even disagreements. If I was quiet, she'd notice immediately. What's going on? She'd ask. And if I hesitated, she'd soften. You can tell me. I don't want us to ever become one of those couples that keep score. It made me want to be better. More open. More trusting. Less suspicious. I didn't want to disappoint her by being the kind of person who doubted. So I leaned into being easygoing. I became proud of it, honestly. I thought being calm meant being strong. I thought not questioning things meant I was secure. And in those early months, it felt like we were building something real. Like we were safe. I didn't know yet that safety can sometimes be something someone creates for you. Right before they start using it against you. As we got more serious, things didn't change overnight. There wasn't a dramatic shift. It was gradual. Subtle enough that I didn't notice it happening. We spent more time together. Fewer nights apart. More shared plans. I started leaving things at her place without thinking about it. A charger. A jacket. A toothbrush that just stayed there. It felt natural. She talked a lot about independence, though. About how healthy couples give each other space. She didn't like clingy behavior. She said it drained her. I've been with jealous people before, she told me once. It's exhausting. The way she said it made me feel like I was being evaluated. Not directly. But quietly. I made sure I wasn't that guy. If she went out with friends, I didn't ask too many questions. If she came home late, I kept my tone light. I wanted her to see that I trusted her. That I wasn't insecure. And she noticed. You're different, she'd say. You don't suffocate me. That meant something to me. I didn't realize at the time how much I wanted her approval. There were small boundaries she set that I didn't question. She kept parts of her life compartmentalized. Certain friends I didn't meet for a while. Certain stories that didn't come with details. If I asked something out of curiosity, she'd answer. But sometimes the answers felt trimmed down. Cleaned up. When I'd pause, even slightly, she'd catch it. "What?" she'd ask. "Nothing," I'd say. And most of the time, it really did feel like nothing. Just a passing thought. A small, unformed doubt that didn't deserve air. She framed privacy as maturity. "Everyone deserves their own space," she'd say. "It doesn't mean they're hiding something." That sounded reasonable. Healthy, even. So when she started locking her phone more consistently, I didn't react. When she angled the screen away absent-mindedly, I told myself it was normal. I reminded myself I wasn't the jealous type. If I ever hesitated too long, she'd look at me carefully. "You trust me, right?" The way she asked it wasn't confrontational. It was soft. Almost vulnerable. And that made it impossible to answer wrong. "Of course," I'd say immediately. Because anything else would mean I was the problem. Over time, I started filtering myself. Not consciously. It just happened. If I noticed something that felt off, I'd run it through a mental checklist before mentioning it. Is this actually suspicious? Or am I overthinking? Do I want to start an unnecessary issue? Most of the time, I decided it wasn't worth it. Peace became more important than clarity. She had a way of resolving disagreements that left me feeling strangely apologetic, even if I wasn't sure what I'd done wrong. If I questioned something lightly, she'd sigh. "I thought we were past this." Past what? I'd wonder. But I'd drop it. I started measuring myself by how calm I could stay. How understanding I could be. I took pride in being steady, in not escalating. And the more I did that, the more she seemed relaxed around me. Confident. She'd joke sometimes, "You'd never check my phone or anything crazy like that, right?" She said it with a laugh. I laughed too. Why would I? She smiled. Exactly. At the time, it felt like we were aligned. Like we trusted each other fully. Looking back, I can see something else forming underneath that alignment. I was slowly being trained to doubt my own instincts before I even voiced them. And I thought that was what maturity looked like. The first few things that bothered me were small enough to ignore. A new name lighting up her screen late at night. A notification she swiped away a little too quickly. A faint smell on her clothes once that wasn't familiar. Each time, there was an explanation. Simple. Logical. Delivered without hesitation. "Probably a coworker," she'd say. Or, "It's nothing. You're reading into it." And most of the time, I believed her. Not because I was naive. At least that's what I told myself. But because I didn't want to be the kind of person who saw threats everywhere. The first time I mentioned a name I didn't recognize, I tried to keep it casual. "Who's that?" She glanced at her phone and shrugged. "Oh. Just someone from a group class. We were coordinating schedules." That was it. Calm. Open posture. No sign of panic. I nodded. Got it. Later that night, I felt embarrassed for even asking. The pattern repeated in different forms. She'd come home later than expected and explain it away with traffic or a last-minute stop somewhere. She'd seem slightly distracted during dinner, then snap back to normal when I asked if everything was okay. "I'm just tired," she'd say. "You know how work gets." And work really did get busy sometimes. That part was true. But there was something else that started creeping in. If I hesitated even a second too long, if my face showed confusion, she'd catch it instantly. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "I'm not," I'd respond quickly. "Yes, you are." Then the conversation would shift. It stopped being about whatever I had noticed. It became about my reaction. "You've been different lately," she told me once, arms folded loosely. "More suspicious." That word stuck. Suspicious. I replayed the previous weeks in my head, trying to pinpoint what I'd done to deserve that label. "I just asked a question," I said carefully. "And I answered it," she replied. "But it feels like you're waiting for me to slip up." I wasn't. At least I didn't think I was. But the way she framed it made me doubt myself. Maybe I was watching her too closely. Maybe I was becoming paranoid. After that, I started editing my questions even more. If I saw something that didn't sit right, I'd wait. Let it pass. See if it resolved on its own. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it didn't. There were nights when she'd sit beside me, scrolling through her phone, her body angled just slightly away. Not dramatically. Just enough. If I leaned in absent-mindedly, she'd lock the screen. "I just like my privacy," she said once, not looking up. I forced a smile. Yeah, of course. The problem wasn't any one moment. It was the accumulation. The explanations were always reasonable in isolation. But stacked together, they started to feel rehearsed. Like she had a response ready before I finished forming the question. One evening, I tried to explain the feeling. "It's not about one thing," I said. "It's just, there's been a few small things that feel off." She stared at me like I'd spoken another language. "Off how?" "I don't know. That's the problem." She shook her head slowly. "You can't just accuse someone based on a feeling." "I'm not accusing you." "It sounds like you are." The conversation spiraled the way they often did. I'd start uncertain but calm. She'd respond confused, then hurt. By the end, I was the one apologizing. "I'm sorry," I said more than once. "I don't know why I'm like this." She softened immediately when I said that. "I just don't want you turning into someone who doesn't trust me," she'd say quietly. Turning into someone. As if suspicion was a personality flaw, not a reaction. Over time, I began to monitor myself more than I monitored her behavior. If I noticed her texting someone late at night, I'd look away. If she mentioned a name I hadn't heard before, I wouldn't ask follow-up questions. I told myself this was growth. Emotional maturity. Confidence. But underneath that effort, there was tension. I started keeping mental notes without meaning to. Not detailed evidence. Just impressions. How often she stepped out to take calls. How certain conversations seemed to stop when I entered the room. How quickly she redirected discussions back to my trust issues. I hated that phrase. It made it sound clinical. Like something was wrong with me. One night, after a small disagreement, she looked exhausted. "I can't live like this," she said quietly. Like what? Feeling questioned all the time. The truth was, I hadn't questioned her that night. I'd asked why she seemed distracted. But the way she said it made me feel like I was suffocating her. I started pulling back emotionally after that. Not in anger. In fear. Fear of becoming the villain in my own relationship. I convinced myself that if I just stayed steady enough, calm enough, trusting enough, the discomfort would fade. Instead, it grew quieter. More controlled. Like something moving behind a closed door. And the worst part was, every time I tried to open that door even slightly, I ended up apologizing for knocking. By the time it happened, I was tired. Not tired in a dramatic way. Just worn down from carrying this quiet tension around, pretending it wasn't there. We were still together. We were still functioning. We still had dinners, conversations, shared errands. On the surface, everything looked normal. But I felt like I was constantly holding my breath. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous. That every relationship has phases. That stress makes people act strange. That I was overanalyzing because I'd let a few small doubts get too loud in my head. So when we got invited to a casual get-together, I actually welcomed it. A social night. Familiar faces. Something outside our apartment walls. It wasn't a party, really. Just one of those relaxed gatherings where people stand around with drinks, talk about nothing important, laugh too loudly at mediocre jokes. She seemed fine that night. Light. Engaged. She moved through conversations easily, smiling, touching my arm occasionally like a reminder that we were solid. I watched her and thought, see? You're doing it again. You're making problems where there aren't any. For a while, I almost believed it. At one point, she stepped away to talk to someone across the yard. I stayed behind, listening to two people nearby discussing work, vacations, mutual acquaintances. I wasn't really paying attention. Then I heard her name. It wasn't said sharply. It wasn't whispered. It was casual. Almost careless. Someone laughed and said something like, "Yeah, I mean, you know how she is. Always around that guy from her training place." I froze. I didn't turn my head right away. I didn't want to make it obvious. My body went still in this strange way, like my brain was trying to decide whether it had heard correctly. Another voice responded, equally casual. I thought everyone knew about that. There was a pause, then a shrug in their tone. It's been going on for a while, hasn't it? The words didn't land all at once. They arrived slowly, like cold water seeping through fabric. My first thought was that they must be talking about someone else. But they said her name again. And then the other name, someone I didn't recognize. Not a coworker. Not a childhood friend. Not a harmless contact. Just, a guy. The way they spoke about it was what cracked something open in me. There was no shock in their voices. No scandal. No hesitation. It sounded like background information. Like something already filed away in their minds. Like common knowledge. I felt my stomach drop, but it wasn't like a dramatic punch. It was more like gravity suddenly shifting. I stood there holding a drink I wasn't drinking, staring at nothing. I wanted to step in and ask what they meant. I wanted to laugh and say, "Wait, what are you talking about?" But I couldn't move. Because if I asked, it would become real. And some part of me already knew. I drifted away from the conversation without them noticing, walking slowly like I was trying not to spill something. My ears were ringing. Not literally, but everything sounded distant, muffled, like I was underwater. Across the yard, she was smiling at someone, her head tilted slightly, laughing. She looked completely normal. That was the sickest part. I watched her and felt this strange disconnect. How could someone look that normal while my entire internal world was rearranging itself? I thought about all the little moments. The locked phone. The soft voice on hallway calls. The way she'd look wounded when I asked simple questions. The way I'd end up apologizing. The way she always had an answer ready. I suddenly understood something I hadn't been able to name before. It wasn't just that she might have been hiding something. It was that she had been managing the story. Performing. Not in an exaggerated way. In a controlled, careful way. Every reasonable explanation. Every gentle accusation back at me. Every moment of calm disappointment. It wasn't randomness. It was strategy. I felt heat rise in my face, not from anger, but from humiliation. Because standing there, watching her laugh, I realized something that made my chest tighten. I wasn't uncovering a secret. I was catching up to one. Everyone else seemed to be standing in the audience already, watching the same show. And somehow, I had been the only one still convinced it was real. I didn't confront her that night. I don't even know how I managed to keep my expression steady. But something had shifted permanently. The doubt wasn't a flaw in me anymore. It was a door that had finally opened. And I couldn't pretend I didn't see what was inside. The drive home was quiet. Not the comfortable kind of quiet we used to share. This was different. Heavy. Full of things I wasn't saying. She didn't seem to notice at first. She talked about something someone had said, a funny moment from the night. Her voice was easy, like nothing had happened. I nodded when I needed to. I kept my hands steady on the wheel. Inside, I felt like I was holding something fragile and sharp. Back at the apartment, she kicked off her shoes, moved around like normal. She poured herself water, asked if I wanted anything. I watched her, trying to understand how someone could look so unchanged. My chest felt tight, but my mind was strangely calm. I didn't want a fight. I didn't want drama. I just wanted the truth to exist in the open, even if it hurt. She sat down on the couch, scrolling through her phone like any other night. That familiar gesture, screen angled slightly away, hit me differently now. I took a breath. "Can I ask you something?" She looked up, neutral. "Sure." I hesitated longer than I meant to. Her expression shifted immediately. "What's going on?" I kept my voice low. "Tonight. I heard something." Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "Heard what?" I could feel my heart beating, but I forced myself not to rush. "People were talking," I said. "About you. About someone you've been spending time with." The air changed. Not dramatically. Just a subtle tightening, like a thread being pulled. She blinked. "What people?" "It doesn't matter who," I said. I want to know if there's something you haven't been honest about." Her face stayed composed, but her voice cooled. "Are you serious right now?" "I'm not trying to accuse you," I said quickly. "I'm telling you what I heard." She leaned back, exhaling through her nose like I'd exhausted her. "This is exactly what I mean," she said. "What do you mean?" "You always do this," she replied. "You take some vague thing and turn it into a whole story." I stared at her. I didn't make it up. She sat forward, eyes sharp now. "So what, you're just going to believe random gossip over me?" "It didn't sound like gossip," I said quietly. "It sounded like people thought it was obvious." Her jaw tightened. For a second, I thought she might actually answer. Instead, she shook her head. "This is insane." The word landed hard. Insane. Like the problem wasn't what I'd heard. The problem was that I was hearing it at all. I swallowed. "Can you just tell me the truth?" "I am telling you the truth," she snapped. "Nothing is going on." I held her gaze. Something in me had shifted. I wasn't scrambling to fix it this time. I wasn't apologizing. I just stayed still. She noticed. Her voice softened suddenly, like she was changing tactics. "Look at me," she said. "Do you really think I would do that to you?" I didn't answer fast enough. Her eyes filled with frustration. "I can't believe you're doing this," she said, standing up. "After everything, you're going to throw this at me because someone said something at a party?" "I'm not throwing anything," I said. "I'm asking." And I answered, she shot back. "But you never accept my answers. You always want more. You always want proof." I almost laughed, but it wasn't humor. It was disbelief. "Do you hear yourself?" I asked. She froze. The room went quiet. Then she spoke carefully. "You're turning into someone I don't recognize." There it was again. The same phrase, like a script she'd memorized. I felt something inside me settle. Not anger. Clarity. I think I've been someone I don't recognize for a while, I said. Her expression flickered. Just for a moment, the composure cracked. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't an apology. It was something smaller. A look that said she understood exactly what I was seeing now. And then she recovered. She crossed her arms, defensive again. I'm not doing this, she said. I can't live under interrogation. I'm not interrogating you, I replied. I'm trying to understand why I feel like I'm the last person to know my own relationship. Her face hardened. That's your insecurity, she said flatly. Not my problem. That sentence was the final break. Because it wasn't denial anymore. It was dismissal. I realized then that the truth might never come out of her mouth in a clean, honest way. Not because it didn't exist. But because keeping it blurred was the whole point. I stood there, looking at someone I thought I knew, and felt the illusion collapse without a sound. And even though nothing had been fully admitted, I knew I would never unsee the performance again. The end wasn't explosive. There wasn't a single dramatic moment where everything fell apart. It was more like something that had already cracked finally giving way under its own weight. We didn't break up that night. But something between us did. The days that followed felt suspended. We moved around each other carefully. Conversations were shorter. Polite. Controlled. I stopped asking questions. She stopped offering reassurance. It was almost peaceful in a strange way. No tension. No probing. Just distance. And that distance told me more than any confession could have. Eventually, it ended in a quiet conversation at the kitchen table. No shouting. No tears. Just a mutual acknowledgement that something essential was gone. She said, I can't keep defending myself. I said, I can't keep doubting myself. That was it. We separated our things. Divided routines. Gave back small objects that once felt symbolic. When I walked out for the last time, I didn't feel rage. I felt embarrassed. Not because I'd loved her. But because I'd ignored myself. In the weeks after, something else started happening. Little comments reached me. Nothing direct. Nothing confrontational. Just passing remarks. Someone saying, I figured you knew. Or, I didn't want to get involved. Or the one that stuck with me the most, I thought you were okay with it. Okay with it. As if I had agreed to something I didn't even know existed. That's when the humiliation hit properly. It wasn't just about her. It was about the audience I didn't realize was watching. The side conversations. The assumptions. The silent judgments. I replayed everything in my head, over and over. The locked phone. The careful language. The way every doubt I raised turned into a flaw in me. And slowly, something shifted. The narrative I'd been given, that I was paranoid, insecure, overthinking, started to unravel. Because if it had all been in my head, why did other people seem so unsurprised? That question was uncomfortable. It forced me to see how easily reality can be shaped when someone controls the tone, the timing, and the framing of every conversation. She hadn't needed to shout or confess or even get caught in something undeniable. All she had to do was make me question my own reactions long enough for everything else to continue quietly. The strangest part is that even now, I don't have a cinematic confession. I don't have proof laid out in a neat timeline. What I have is a pattern. A performance. And the realization that I kept apologizing for noticing it. If you've ever been in a situation where you felt like you were slowly losing trust in your own instincts, I want you to pause for a second. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and let me know in the comments if you've ever been made to feel like the unreasonable one for simply asking questions. Because that feeling, that subtle rewriting of reality, is harder to explain than outright betrayal. Over time, the embarrassment faded. The clarity didn't. I stopped needing her to admit anything. I stopped needing a final piece of evidence. What mattered was that I had crossed that invisible line from doubt to awareness. And once I saw the pattern clearly, I understood something that took me a long time to accept. I wasn't crazy. I was just the last one willing to see it. There are nights now when I sit in the same kind of quiet we used to share. Not in the same place. Not in the same life. Just the same kind of silence. And I think about how normal everything looked from the outside. That's what stays with me the most. There were no dramatic warning signs. No obvious villain. No single moment I can point to and say, that's when it all fell apart. It unraveled softly. Through reasonable explanations. Through calm reassurances. Through questions that somehow became accusations the moment I asked them. I used to replay the details, searching for the exact moment I should have known for sure. The point where doubt became justified instead of insecure. But the truth is, there wasn't a clean line. There was just a feeling. A subtle shift in energy. A look that lasted half a second too long. A tone that didn't match the words. And every time I noticed it, I buried it. Not because I was blind. Because I didn't want to be wrong about her. I didn't want to be the kind of person who distrusted someone who hadn't been caught. It's strange how much we rely on evidence in relationships. Screenshots. Messages. Confessions. As if betrayal only counts when it's undeniable. But what I learned is that sometimes the deeper damage isn't in what happened. It's in how you were made to question yourself while it was happening. That's the part that lingers. The way I'd start a sentence and then edit it mid-thought. The way I'd rehearse simple questions in my head before asking them. The way I felt relief when she called me secure, like I'd passed some kind of test. I thought I was proving my strength by staying calm. I didn't realize I was slowly negotiating away my instincts. And I don't even hate her. That surprises people when I say it. I don't hate her. I hate how long I needed her to confirm what I already felt. I hate that I measured my worth by how little I reacted. If I could go back, I don't think I'd demand proof. I don't think I'd yell or accuse or try to trap her in a contradiction. I'd just pay attention to myself sooner. Because trust isn't about never questioning anything. It's about feeling safe enough that your questions don't turn you into the villain. There's a difference between jealousy and intuition. I confused the two. Or maybe I was taught to. Now, when something feels off in my life, I don't immediately silence it. I sit with it. I let it breathe. Sometimes it turns out to be nothing. Sometimes it doesn't. But I don't apologize for noticing anymore. That's the real change. The routine we used to have, the quiet evenings, the easy conversations, those are gone. And I've stopped wishing for them back. Because what I miss wasn't her. It was the version of me who felt safe without second-guessing himself. So here's the question I still wrestle with. At what point does giving someone the benefit of the doubt turn into betraying your own instincts? How long should you keep choosing trust? If every time you do, it costs you a little more of yourself? If this story made you think about your own boundaries or experiences, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Because sometimes the hardest betrayal to recognize is the one that convinces you it's all in your head.